organisation plans moving forward. Kia ora, Leon.
Kia ora.
We're also joined by Josh Williams, the Principal Consultant at Skills Consulting Group, who presented today on New Zealand's work-based learning model and apprenticeships, as well as sharing his expertise across New Zealand's industry training system. Kia ora, Josh.
Kia ora, Ben. Kia ora tātou.
Next up, we have Darren Conway, who is both the Chair of English New Zealand and the Managing Director of Languages International. Through his earlier presentation, Darren provided a comprehensive overview of the English language training landscape in New Zealand. Kia ora, Darren. Now, we do have a few questions coming through, which I'll get started on. We'll try and cover off as many as we can within the next 15 minutes. This is one that has come through from an agent. Leon, I'll pass this one over to you if you can help to answer this one. I am an agent. Will my contracts with an ITP change under Te Pūkenga?
The likelihood of that happening down the line is quite high. For now, the relationships that agents have with the various ITPs, with the various politics, will remain in place. And at some point going into the future, there will be a new process involved of engaging with the whole of the sector, remembering then that we're all becoming part of the new entity called Te Pūkenga, and the relationship will then legally be through Te Pūkenga, but still connected to us on campuses right across New Zealand. The way that you have to see it is that you no longer have a relationship maybe with one institution in one region, but you'll have a relationship with one institution with 60 campuses spread across the whole of New Zealand. So your reach is actually going to increase.
Okay. Thank you, Leon. One other question here for you as well. Are there programs or pathways for international secondary institutions, so high schools offshore, that would like to form partnerships or exchange programs? As an example, some work immersion programs.
Yeah, we don't have any examples that I'm aware of at the moment of subsidiaries or polytechs having relationship with schools progressing directly from schools to New Zealand-based tertiary institutions. The route there in the main will still remain directly back through to schools in New Zealand. So that would be our advice, to connect through to the platform that's already available there, with the learners coming across and studying onshore here. And from there, we have a strong relationship with schools that help us to progress learners that want to move from schools here in New Zealand through to qualification pathways in our sector.
Thank you. There's plenty coming through to you here, Leon. I'm going to ask the next one. I am aware that ITPs are open to international students. Is work-based learning also open to the international students as well as the domestic students?
They are. So the qualification determines the nature of the work-based learning that takes place. It is our default position as a vocational institution that part of the training is closely connected to the industry that they serve. So part of the curriculum, the tuition, takes place in the workplace through various mechanisms, whether it's off-campus internships or various other ways of connecting with the industry. So yes, work-based learning is part of the program for international students as well.
Thanks, Leon. Josh, over to you. There's a question here. With the New Zealand Recovery Plan in international education, do you see any new opportunities for the work-based learning model? What is the future vision for this model, do you think, in New Zealand?
Yeah, look, and I think across the range of presentations, with the forms and the creation of Te Pūkenga, what we're really moving to is an ecosystem where employers and our regionally based institutions are working hand in hand, because we do need to be integrated in that way. So I think, in many ways, I always see these things as, on the employer while being centered on the learner. And I think this responds to another question as well. And as Leon's just said, yes, a right to work in New Zealand is a right to train. Sometimes an apprenticeship is a bit long, potentially, for somebody that's here on a study or working visa. But certainly, we've got shorter courses and traineeships, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, the vision, I think, really is about the ability for both regional campuses to be offering skills, as well as people situated with those employers, and that being led through. So we're making sure that the skills are relevant for those industries.
Relevant question to that response. So let me just read this. I'll verbatim. I understand that some of the industries in New Zealand are lacking domestic labour and are demanding on international labour workforces. I wonder if skills or other ITPs have any programs or agendas that provide/target vocational training for international workers who currently live outside New Zealand. Might be one for both Josh and Leon, if you're able to answer.
I think Leon might want to comment on that too. Certainly, in terms of offshore delivery, it's not something that our industry training and apprenticeship system has done a lot of. We have worked quite a lot overseas with governments and corporates around systems, things like qualifications frameworks, assessment, quality assurance. In a sense, offering up the New Zealand know-how to systems, particularly that want to build their own apprenticeship systems. But we haven't really been involved in much of offshore awarding of industry training in that sense. Just, I guess, to the front part of the question, I mean, migration, we've got borders closed around the world. We're still in the midst of the pandemic. But, the number of industries that are crying out for skills in New Zealand, there are acute shortages just about everywhere you look. I think one of the differences between the global financial crisis and the pandemic is that as soon as people are vaccinated and can move around safely and borders can open, well, then the work is there waiting to be done. And certainly here in New Zealand, we're getting a lot of call from employers who simply cannot find enough workers. So I think it's a great idea and, an area that we can collaborate on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to what Josh added spot on with his response there. I think the one addition I could make is that various settings are being used by the government to make sure we get the right labour in front of the market. In this case, using something like post-study work rights to connect that to specific types of labour market needs is always the way to go, to incentivize people to study those qualifications coming from international and then connecting them through to employment after the fact. So those keep on changing depending what those needs are for us.
Thanks, Leon. There's another question here. I'll just read this too. PIM, a corporate university, values work-based learning and is widening its scope of programs to coincide with the country's economic strategy. Which areas would New Zealand vocational institutions recommend are useful to Thailand's education sector during this time? Would anyone like to comment on that question?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to respond to because it's asked specifically about Thailand. So I don't know, Josh, if you've got a specific view on that.
No, I certainly no. I'm not very familiar with the particular needs of the jurisdiction, but I mean, in terms of what's being attempted, absolutely, that's the right thing to do. I mean, what we do here, our standard setting bodies is a lot of that kind of political work into future labour market requirements. And I think also where institutions play a key role is sometimes when employers are busy and focused on the here and now, looking ahead at the new technologies and the emerging things and the R&D that's changing. I mean, we're very, in New Zealand, we've got a very strong training culture among our employers. And so things like internships, cadetships, apprenticeships are a reasonably wide range. Of course, like just about all countries, most of the training that employers do is informal. So really what I think is the kind of challenge for any country, and I suspect Thailand, just like any other country, it's about getting employers to choose to train as part of the formal system. So it's, usable and giving them the skills that they are looking for so that they're opting into a formal training, and that supports those workers and it upskills the workforce as a whole. So I think, certainly in jurisdictions that we work with around the world, the mega trend right now is how do we formalize the informal through improving our systems and making them easier to access for those employers in those industries.
Just a quick addition to what Josh has said is that part of what we do is we work very closely with key agencies in each of the countries, with partners as well, to truly understand what their training needs are. And part of what our sector does really well is to develop qualifications and the right mix within that qualification to respond to their specific need. But the basis of that will always be solid work-based learning to take place as part of the qualification, for sure.
Thanks, Leon. Thanks, Josh. A question for you here, Darren. There's a number of teachers and education leaders online asking if there are still, given that they cannot currently travel to New Zealand, are there still English language training options for them to undertake online through New Zealand?
Mainly in the academic English space for people that are preparing to come here to take up degree or other higher level studies. There is a bit of general English training around as well.
Okay. And are you able to also explain to some of the audience what quality assurance does New Zealand and through NZQA provide for these online programs?
Anybody that's running a qualification offshore that's under NZQA's oversight needs to have put in a application for approval of a change of mode of delivery, and it's been vetted before it's been able to be offered.
Okay, thanks, Darren. So there's just a few comments. There's a lot of interest in working with Te Pukenga and skills consulting group. So we will establish connections following this session. One question here, is it compulsory for any businesses, including SMEs in New Zealand, to give training to all their employees? Are they mandated by the New Zealand government in this respect?
No. So as I was saying before, in choice to train with an ITO, in New Zealand, about 15% of the employers in New Zealand who are running enterprises of more than one person, as in they're not just self-employed. So about 15% of all of the firms in New Zealand are involved with what I describe as formal ITO training. That means qualifications. That's actually over half of the vocational learners in New Zealand. And so, work-based learning and apprenticeships is a really core part of our system already. And I think if we all reflect on the future of work challenges, technology change, then lifelong learning and upskilling and reskilling people in the existing workforce is going to become more and more of what I've heard someone call the gravitational pull of vocational systems. So in that regard, a big part of what's going on here in New Zealand is to get better integration and collaboration going between institutions, so that in all of our regions that can happen. But no, there's no have to train as part of the system in New Zealand. The government certainly is encouraging it and has a number of policies to encourage it, especially in the COVID response period. But no, it's not compulsory.
Okay, thanks, Josh. We have just about 50 seconds left. There's a question here which you touched on during your presentation. Can my students study a trade as an apprenticeship in New Zealand? That would be very attractive. Are you able to quickly just give a key summary of that point as well, please, Josh? Well, 45 seconds left if you can.
Well, short answers are my specialty. Look, yes, it would be certainly attractive. And as I did say before, the policy in New Zealand where if you come here and you have a right to work, then you have a right to train, which is excellent because, a lot of those people will take those skills back offshore. But in the end, we all rely and here on people that are competent and capable to do what they do. So as I said before, potential requirements, but the trend is towards shorter things.
Great. Thank you, Josh. That's a good note to finish on. Thank you, everybody.